Everybody, this is Perch. I love comics. Obviously, when you have more than 1,000 videos on your channel and you're putting multiple ones up a day, then you clearly love comics. And every now and then, somebody will come in and they'll be like, "Ah, if you hate comics so much, why do you keep reading them?" Like, clearly, I don't hate comics, sir. If I'm doing 1,000 plus videos, I clearly love comics. And if you look at the titles, not every single one of those videos is called "I hate comics and here's why." In fact, the majority of them are, here's something good about comics. Here's something to explain about comics. If you hated comics, you wouldn't bother explaining anything. You just burn it down. But I love comics. And what's interesting about loving comics is that when you do love comics, when you do enjoy this industry, there is blind spot's the wrong word, but there is something that happens to you where you find yourself at times having to love it in spite of. And this can be an interesting trap for people. It can be a place where you look past kind of problems or bad behaviors or things that are truly broken in the industry because you love it. I mean, at the end of the day, you want it to succeed. And I think this is one of the things, at least, that for me, the channels I listen to, of which I listen to various shows from time to time and kind of pick up on what other people are saying. And what I find is that the ones I subscribe to, the ones I pay attention to, the ones where I listen, are the ones where, regardless if the person is saying a positive or a negative thing, it's clear that they truly do love comics, that what they love at the core is this business. They're trying to untangle it. They're trying to pick at something. They're trying to get to the bottom of maybe a frustration or something they enjoyed and they don't quite understand, and they're talking their way through it. This underlying underpinning of somebody who does love comics is key to at least what I like to listen to. I think love is a weird thing because love can certainly, like I said, it can blind you to problems. It can also keep you going through a lot of problems. It can keep you invested. It can keep you, in the picture. And I think that most of the people listening to this right now, if you are a comic collector, if you are somebody who collected comics in the 80s or the 70s or the 90s, however old you are, if you in your house have several long boxes full of comics, and if you've ever found yourself saying things like, "I need to complete my run," and the run was in triple digits. I'm not talking about you need to complete this 6-issue limited series you're doing. I'm talking about you need to complete the 400 or 500 issue, the 1,000 issue series. I need to have all these comics. If you ever have yourself saying that, then you know what it means to have a dry spell in comics. You know what it means to go through a period where you really didn't like the comic you were collecting, but you did it anyway, not because you're a simp or because you're stupid or because you just have cash to burn, you don't care, but because you love the comic so much. You love whatever it is you're doing that you are willing to stick it out. You're invested in it. Now, that granted, there's collectors who are just trying to complete a run for whatever reason, but for because there's this belief that that's going to make it more monetarily valuable. But more often than not, the people who come into the comic shop, the people who buy back issues from me, the people who talk about runs and how to find, people are going on these quests to find these issues. Those people tend to be doing it for the love. Yes, I mean, some of them I'm sure have the fantasy of being able to send their kids to college with that. They never would, though. Those kids, brats, can pay for their own college. You're not interrupting my comics. Anyway, no matter how, I think that's the difference between a collector and a speculator. A speculator might be somebody who's buying all the number one issues that are coming out. In the 90s, when I was selling comics, there were certainly plenty of those people who they would always, I had pull box customers who would say, every time there's a number one issue, I want it. And Marvel and Image and to some extent DC certainly came to be aware of that fact and I think abused the hell out of it. But that was a thing. And that those people didn't necessarily ever read the issues. Those people were definitely speculators. But the people who are trying to complete the run, the people who are like, I want to have every issue of The Flash. That's my dream. And they would go for it. That's coming from a place of love. And when you're collecting a comic for that length of time, there are creators who come onto it that you dislike. There's stories that you're not fond of, but you stick with it because you have faith that it's going to get better. You have faith that this character that you love and respect is going to survive. And I do think, by the way, that's one of the reasons why you see some fans get so passionately angry when a comic removes a character, like when it does go from Steve Rogers to Bucky or from Steve Rogers to Sam Wilson. That is where you do see some people angry because they feel like you're ripping away at the foundation of whatever this comic they collected in. I think that behavior is entirely reasonable. I think there's way too many people who are saying, they're quick to dismiss that. They're quick to kind of scoff at your love of something by saying, well, the comic's still there. If you still want it, you can get back issues. No one took your comic away from you. You're not owed this comic. I see these responses sometimes, and they're sad. There are certainly people who go and they rant and rave over everything, and that's my point about I will listen to channels where it's clear that at the core of it is a love for comics as opposed to a love of ranting and raving. And there are those people too. But it's love for a comic and love for comics, for me at least. It's one of those things where I think as long somebody I recently talked to said, you don't, as long as you don't need comics to love you back, you'll be okay. I've been thinking about that statement a lot because I think it's a smart one. It's basically saying, if your passion for comics does not require comics to feed it, comics to feed you back in return, then you're able to have a healthy relationship with comics. So it's a weird way to kind of think about it. This will require maybe some of you're onto this idea right away, but for others it may take some time to kind of mull this one over in your mind. If you work in comics and you're excited and you love the passion of being able to create stories, create art, whatever it happens to be, and that's your love, and you're not in a position where you need some editor or some publisher to, say life affirming things to you, to basically treat you well, because a lot of the publishers won't treat you well. Bluntly, as a creator, and there's a million stories. What is the comics will break your heart kid quote? It's a truthful one. I think as long as you are in a place in your life where your love can be complete without it needing to be returned, you're probably healthier, saner, more able to have a good feeling about this industry. It always strikes me when you run into people who like we did the interview with Jim Salicrup, and here's a guy who has been in comics for a long time and clearly still loves comics. Is just feels good about it, feels happy about it. If you'll notice in his interview, and it was a long interview, you'll notice at no point did did he kind of infer that he felt like he needed something from comics in return specific. He just was happy with his job. He was happy with his love of the business. He's content. There's a ton of people out there who are miserable, who are bitter, who were run out of comics. We talk about people who had an unhappy ending. There's a lot of unhappy ending people out there. And in many cases, it's because of some of the things we've talked about. They were pushed too quickly, too fast, or they had to watch as they poured their heart into something, and then the company greedily took their creations and their money and pocketed it. I don't think Alan Moore has particularly fond feeling of a lot of things in comics right now. I may be wrong about that. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I kind of get the feeling he's kind of pretty bitter. Not just at DC, about the whole thing. And that would be a shame for a very, very talented mind who did a lot for comics. I don't think it's embarrassing or bad to love comics. People have made that comment as well, like it's something shameful, like oh, you love comics. I mean, I'm sorry, if you grew up in the '80s reading comics, plenty of people thought you were a nerd at the time. I went through all that back then. You can't shame me for loving comics at this point in my life. Sorry, I'm happy to love them, and I'm happy to want to love them. And I think that's the interesting angle that People ask me, why are you reading the Hellfire Gala? Why are you reading the X-Men? Well, one reason is I have all the X-Men comics, all of them, literally all of them. I've collected them all, and I will keep doing it. Why? Because I love the X-Men. I love that comic. I love the stories that were told. No, I am not fond of them moving to Mars, but I still love the X-Men. And a writer, in the grand scheme of things, somebody coming in and doing a take I don't like, doesn't disrupt that love of the X-Men. To me, it's not a contradiction to say, I love this comic and I don't like this comic. I, I love this. I love this creation. I love what can be done with it. And I know that many things can be done with it. I know that there's amazing stories that can be told with these characters. I know it because I've read them. And I do have confidence and faith. I will read them again. I am not a doomer who believes that the best days are all behind us and nothing good will ever happen again. I'm very confident I'll read an X-Men story in the future I'll like. I would love it if the current stories, the ones that I'm reading right now, I wish I liked them more. I really do. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to give up on comics because I don't. And that's the love part. Anyway, lots of interesting things to think about. Comics will break your heart, but maybe it doesn't completely have to. Thanks for listening.